The presidential couple's craving for world recognition was all part of their growing need for adulation. With no lack of invitations from all over the world, they'd stick pins in this globe at random to determine where to go next.
Our leader is a political genius, and the world looks up to him with great respect and admiration. Whether visiting foreign world leaders or participating in international debates on the destiny of our planet, he is the man whose name is uttered with the highest esteem and admiration throughout the world. This man, through his exemplary life and prodigious activity, and through his visionary spirit, embodies the highest aspirations among people for freedom, peace, and civilization.
This crass form of image building was designed to show Romanians that world leaders of every conceivable political variety looked on Ceausescu with veneration. But sometimes, the Ceausescus made an indelible impression for other reasons.
Quand il est venu en visite officielle, c'est-à-dire en 1978,
when he came on a state visit in 1978, he had completely changed. Power had gone to his head. He interrupted continuously, he was arrogant, he wouldn't let people speak. He laid down the law without allowing the slightest contradiction when his extremely narrow-minded views were questioned. He was our guest at the Hotel Marigny, where VIPs on official visits are housed opposite the Élysée Palace. Unfortunately, after he had left, the head of the Marigny residence came to see me appalled and said, "It's frightful. The place has been wrecked." I didn't connect what he was saying with the recent visitors, but he said, "They've taken everything away." There were lots of ornamental objects, lamps, vases, ashtrays, bathroom fittings. After their departure, the place had been emptied. Everything had been unscrewed and packed away. It was as if burglars had moved in for a whole summer. Naturally, this confirms the bad impression he and his team had made. And unofficially, of course, I warned those who were about to receive him, for he was on a European tour, that they should take the kind of precautionary measures I had been unable to foresee.
Queen Elizabeth was compelled by the Callaghan government to welcome the Ceausescus, complete with their food taster, at Buckingham Palace. A lucrative British aerospace contract was in the offing, and Ceausescu would only sign it if invited by the Queen and given a royal welcome. Sergiu Celac was the Ceausescu's interpreter.
I think that the state visit to Britain was a sort of crowning ceremony, formal recognition of his and her imperial status. He had a healthy respect of royalty as a symbol of something he wanted for himself. He wanted, I think, to be a royal president of a communist country.
The Ceausescus also used the visit and his honorary knighthood to show his people the high esteem in which he was held abroad. Thanks to President Giscard's warning, nothing was stolen from Buckingham Palace, but the Ceausescus were convinced their rooms were bugged. Years later, the aerospace deal would still be the subject of acrimonious debate. Ceausescu bought only one British plane and tried to pay for it with strawberries. Other hosts turned out to be even more gullible.
The people of the United States are honored by having as our guest a great leader of a great country. Their influence as Romanian leaders throughout the international world is exceptional. Our goals are also the same: to have a just system. We believe in enhancing human rights.
The Ceausescus were so pleasantly surprised by Carter's remarks, they called in their interpreter that night and had him repeat them over and over again. A whole array of distinguished Americans were eager to meet the maverick good communist.
I've enjoyed being with him. He's a very good advisor. He's a man who in the past has suffered greatly, imprisoned, tortured, but because of his courage and because of his belief in the future of his own country, notable achievements have been brought to the people who have confidence in him.
But sometimes protocol was powerless to prevent the unexpected.
In New York, he arrived at the end of his trip, and he couldn't return to the hotel late at night because a group of Hungarians had arrived and demonstrated and didn't allow him into the hotel. The next morning, the mayor and the head of the city police were to come and apologize to him, and Ed Koch was then mayor. And Koch came in and said, "Mr. President, last night those friends of mine were down there demonstrating against you, and they tell me you don't give freedom of religion and freedom of and cultural freedoms to your Hungarians living in Transylvania. Is that true, Mr. President?" And Ceausescu went white, and he turned to me and he said, "What does the State Department say about this? How does he talk to me like this?" And I said, "Well, the federal government has its policies and the mayor has it," but it was, and he got furious, and he said he was going to leave. And he didn't leave early because Mrs. Ceausescu had not yet been to Cartier, and she spent 3.5 hours in Cartier that day.
Heroes of the Games, Romania.
Defying the Soviet boycott of the Olympic Games, Ceausescu sent a Romanian team to Los Angeles in 1984. In the West, his anti-Russian stance was still paying off.
Just listen to this crowd.
One diplomat who was not taken in was David Funderburk, the American ambassador to Romania.
I was reading about and witnessing the destruction of churches and synagogues on a regular basis, the murder of pastors and priests, the jailing and persecution of political and religious dissidents, and basically a horrible reign of terror that Ceausescu was carrying out. I reported this information back to Washington on a weekly basis, and it didn't affect policy in terms of Washington continuing to consider Ceausescu as a favorite son. It helped keep Ceausescu in power for many more years without exposing him for what he really was.
Few Western leaders were aware of Ceausescu's growing paranoia. One of those who did know was his top intelligence aide, General Pacepa.
Ceausescu's plan was to be able to monitor the whole population. That's the way he kept his grip on power. There was a big army of very little people, faceless people, who didn't know anything, didn't do anything but listening and writing what was happening in the most intimate moments of the life of everybody.
General Pacepa, still in hiding today, crossed over to the West in 1978. On Ceausescu's orders, all traces of his past existence were removed. It was this defection that fueled Ceausescu's growing paranoia. An obsessive concern for secrecy and personal security led him to extend an already existing network of underground tunnels and bunkers in Bucharest. Increasingly, he began operating through Securitate, the secret police. On his instructions, Securitate deliberately acquired a fearful reputation for psychological as opposed to physical terror. Romanians believed that in any workplace, at any social gathering, half the people present were spying on the other half for Securitate.
It was a kind of a psychological terror. Try to imagine a huge apparatus spreading rumors, spreading the feeling of fear and terror, like creating a psychological atmosphere in which common people used to think that if they will try to do the smallest gesture, insignificant gesture, which can be identified as an opposition to the political regime in Romania, and especially to Ceausescu, they will disappear.
Securitate also guarded the Ceausescu's collection of stately homes. All over Romania, the couple appropriated the finest residences, retreating into their reclusive private world. The interiors were interchangeable in a kitsch French Renaissance style. This was one of 40 palaces. Huge ballrooms were decorated at enormous expense and used only once every 10 years. After visiting Versailles Palace, Elena developed a passion for chandeliers. The bathrooms reflected their increasing obsessions with health and status. Because Elena tended to put on weight, exercise machines and Romanian-designed jacuzzis were a feature of every palatial abode. Her other passion was for stained glass. Every night, wherever they happened to be, they watched a movie. He was a Kojak and Columbo fan. She liked romantic costume dramas. Both adored The Great Gatsby, which they saw over and over again, sometimes as often as once a week. The Gatsby lifestyle, filmed by Securitate for their home movies, became their dream come true. Their personal staff bore the brunt of Elena's petty stinginess, as their head waiter recalled.
On the occasion of his name day, St. Nicholas, Ceausescu gave me the remains of his birthday cake to share among the staff. But Elena forbade it, saying we weren't suitable people to receive such a gift.
Food tasters sampled all their meals because of their paranoid fear of poison. Minute portions of everything they ate were sent to laboratories and analyzed. The fiction of an exemplary family life was maintained. But Nicu's scandalous playboy excesses were talked about in hushed whispers, as were Valentin's strained relations with his parents. With their daughter Zoya, they put on a public show of affection. But, as she told me, the family tensions were considerable.
Au fost în mare măsură puși de mama mea să ne supravegheze pe noi toți copiii dintr-o...
My mother asked the Securitate to keep an eye on all of her children. This might have been out of a misguided sense of love, but whatever it was excessive. Securitate couldn't touch us, but the information they provided my mother with created a lot of problems for us.
As the excessive power continued to impair Ceausescu's judgment, he came to believe he was above human frailties and didn't need medication.
He would often refuse the proper treatment for his diabetes, and because he also suffered from high blood pressure, he started having various psychological problems and mood swings. He became increasingly unstable, irritable, and suspicious. The only person he trusted was his wife, Elena.
I didn't notice it at first, but it became clear to me that my father had changed. It happened over the years. Power had a serious, destructive effect on him. He remained active and hard-working, but I think that in the long run, he lost his sense of judgment, and he should have retired some time before. To try and run a country, even as small as Romania, single-handed, is impossible. I think this was his big mistake.
Cred că asta a fost greșeala esențială.
The most striking example of his megalomania was the way he pursued his one single-minded hobby. Every regional party secretary knew his career depended on the way he organized Ceausescu's shooting parties.
Ceausescu wasn't really interested in hunting as a sport. He took no real pleasure in anything except the size of the trophy. For the bear hunts, we had to put up observation posts. Here, the animals would be fed and watered daily over a period of months. When a potential winner came up, that is, the largest and fattest of the bears, Ceausescu would be informed, and when the poor animal blundered into view, expecting lunch, Ceausescu would be there with his gun to claim the biggest trophy.
A Securitate cameraman was very nearly killed recording this massive boar hunt. To prove his marksmanship, Securitate faked this film, including the clumsily added gun flashes, showing him killing a wild boar with every shot. For George Maurer, who had helped him to power, Ceausescu's behavior was a sure sign of instability.
I had the very first inkling of Ceausescu's sickness as I watched him hunt. He had special teams to collect all the dead animals shot by the other hunters. They were put on display so he could claim he had killed them himself.
In the rows of slaughtered animals was proof of his mastery over at least some of the elements around him. I can't help feeling that his increasing passion for killing was an escape from problems surfacing in the early 80s. The catastrophic state of hospitals and orphanages, the lack of food in the shops. In a further flight from reality, he was developing a new obsession. Ceausescu, the town planner, was now intent on turning once cosmopolitan Bucharest into a monstrous concrete city resembling North Korea's capital, Pyongyang. From 1984 onwards, 1/5 of old Bucharest simply disappeared, along with 50,000 homes. The showpiece of renovated Bucharest was the House of the Republic. The Avenue of the Victory of Socialism was deliberately designed to be broader and longer than the Champs-Élysées in Paris. The largest building in the world was intended as Ceausescu's posthumous legacy to an admiring nation. The sheer scale of this completely useless architectural white elephant was enough to call the Ceausescu's sanity into question. But such was their grip on the country in the 80s that only a handful of dissident Romanians dared to speak up. In any case, environmental rape on an even larger scale was taking place in the countryside. To achieve a cultural revolution that had constantly eluded him and increase Securitate's grip, Ceausescu started bulldozing 5,000 villages and moving the farmers into flats. His goal was to turn peasants into workers. By the late 80s, his image in the West had been reduced to that of an old-fashioned Stalinist out to wreck Romania's cultural heritage. From his spring palace in Bucharest, Ceausescu watched on television the Malta summit in November '89 between Bush and Gorbachev, convinced they were plotting his downfall. He couldn't grasp that now the Cold War was ending, his anti-Soviet posturing had become obsolete. He hadn't changed, the rest of the world had. By this time, Elena was practically running the country, screening Ceausescu's mail and censoring all disturbing reports addressed to him. Even Securitate stopped briefing him on the Romanians' real mood. The time would come when the wildest rumors would spread over the origins of the uprising that toppled Ceausescu. My own view is that while there were indeed some establishment figures ready to betray him when the time was ripe, it was the spontaneous behavior of ordinary Romanians that triggered their action. With disturbances in Transylvania already well underway, Ceausescu was unwise enough to hold a rally in Bucharest at the end of December '89. So provocative was this that later it was believed some of his own advisors had set him up. For the first time, Romanians dared show their true feelings.
Populare din București, considerând aceasta ca o
Romanian television went dead and the revolution began.
When he stepped away from the balcony, he remained absolutely silent, but his expression said it all. I had never seen him look like this. He was totally shaken. I think he was aware of the great danger ahead and sensed his own end.
With an angry rooftop mob closing in on them, the Ceausescus panicked and made their escape by helicopter, ignoring the network of tunnels that might have saved their lives. After they had left Bucharest, Romanians went on an anti-Ceausescu rampage as the army joined the revolution. Aware of the turning tide, their helicopter pilot ditched them by the roadside. Hours later, they'd been arrested and were prisoners in an army barracks, still unable to believe their luck had run out at last. Dotted around Romania were dozens of palaces they had never even bothered to visit. Now, their last 3 nights were spent huddled together, bickering on a camp bed in this tiny room. Major Tecu was one of the officers guarding them round the clock.
First, he said, "How about fighting on my side for the cause?" I said, "What cause? I'm already on the side of the people." Then he said, "How would you like a nice luxury villa?" Before I could react, he was offering me more. He said, "How about $2 or $3 million in a secret bank account? Would that help?" I looked at him and thought to myself, so this is the great conductor, the famous leader, the genius we had been taught to revere, trying to bribe a simple major like me.
At the farcical trial, their mutual dependency was their one redeeming feature. They remained true to type. He was stubborn, full of inarticulate rage. She remained, almost to the very end, a foul-mouthed, hot-tempered autocrat who terrified all those who had served her. We'll never know what the Ceausescus thought as they finally understood they were about to die. But my guess is that both remained so insulated from reality that despite this ultimate rejection of everything they stood for, they still believed that they, and they alone, were the victims of this tragedy. Major Ceausescu was the officer who led them out to be shot.
A fost momentul în care au fost luați către pe lângă zid.
I think they only realized they were going to die when the soldiers led them out of the building, round this corner and into the courtyard. One of the soldiers looked at Elena and said, "You've had it, lady." And she told him to go to hell, using very bad language. Then she said to her husband, "This can't be. Surely, Nicolae, they don't still have the death penalty in Romania." But he just stuttered something I couldn't understand.
Nu mai trage nimeni.
Ridică-l să-l vedem. Ridică-l să-l vedem. Ridică-l, mai sus capul.
The soldiers had been told to aim at the body, not the face, so people would recognize him and know he was really dead. Hidden away in a cluttered Bucharest warehouse is all that's left of the Ceausescus in their glory. Gifts and mementos of their world travels, tokens of an era all those who helped foster the myth would rather forget. But as a veteran communist who witnessed Nicolae Ceausescu's rise and fall reminds us, the real legacy is elsewhere.
That after 25 years of such a dictatorship, the legacy is not only economic, political, and social, it is also within us. Our mentality, our mindset, our behavior, our habits are all still affected by that black period of Romanian history.
He was a musician, a national hero, and he died of AIDS in 1989. Join us for the story of a remarkable man who inspired a nation. A special presentation of Frontline and the Health Quarterly tonight at 9.
Last month, the passions that have split the United States